get your professional start, as so many great British actors have, in English rep.
Yeah.
You're basically doing a play a week and rehearsing next week's play. What lessons do you think you learned there that still sustain you today through your glorious stage and screen career?
Discipline, first of all. Without discipline, self-discipline, life in weekly rep, and I was only in weekly rep for about 2 months, but we did do a new play every Monday night, and we'd rehearse it Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday morning, and then open it on Monday night. I then went for 2 years into a fortnightly rep, 2 weekly rep, where we had 10 days to rehearse a play. And I'm not just talking about doing pot boilers and things, you know, we did things like Ibsen's Rosmer's Home. We did Death of a Salesman, all rehearsed in a few days and thrown onto the stage. So without discipline, what was achieved by those productions could not have been achieved. So it meant not having much of a life, working during the day, doing a show, going home and learning lines for the next day and thinking about the script and trying to make some choices, because you didn't have time to examine, as one does today, a role. You simply had to make pretty fast judgments about who a character was and what he was and go for it. There is nothing more important than that. There is one other thing which I didn't experience, I didn't have, not really until I came to Hollywood, which is the lesson that you can work very hard and be successful and do good work and have fun as well. There is a story which has now become legendary in the world of Star Trek, that a few months after we had started shooting the first season at Paramount, and I had never been in Hollywood before. I mean, the day that I drove onto the Paramount lot for the first time was one of the greatest, most exciting days of my life, because although I didn't go through that wonderful gateway, I had seen Sunset Boulevard, and I knew that scene when she arrived in the open limo at the gates of Paramount. So to be on the Paramount lot was, in fact, the excitement never left me for the 7 years we were working there. And one day I called a meeting of the cast. Unbelievably embarrassing, this story. Jonathan Frakes, Denise Crosby, Gates McFadden, Marina Sirtis, LeVar Burton. And I said, listen, something that I'm concerned about and I want to share it with you. I was the captain after all. I mean, damn it, if anybody could speak to me, it was me. I was the leading actor and I had sat in the captain's chair. And I said, we have got to get a grip. Look, there's too much fooling around, there's too much messing about on the set. One of the things that you people don't seem to understand is that we get breaks, we get times off, we go to our trailers, you know, people bring us coffee, or when it's hot, we have cold towels put around our necks. And then we have days off, or we have late calls, or we wrap early. There are 30 people on this set to whom that never happens. They're here every day, 12, 14, 16 hours a day. And I think we've got to show them respect by doing the work more effectively and more efficiently than we're doing it. Silence. Well, they all looked at one another. And then Denise Crosby said, Patrick, come on, we've got to have some fun. And I said, and this is what has gone down in history, we are not here to have fun. Well, thank you, Jonathan, thank you, LeVar, thank you, Michael, thank you, Brent. You all taught me how wrong I was, that you could have so much fun, and because of the fun, actually do better work. I've worked with Seth now on American Dad for, I think, 12 seasons. And that has been, and also on Ted and Ted 2, doing voiceovers for him. And that's been a great experience. I mean, I was a huge fan of him and his work. And the other guy who did it for me was Ricky Gervais, because Ricky asked me to do an episode of his first season of Extras. Actually, I had hardly ever done comedy before that. That's what led me into comedy, into finding what joy there is And then I remembered an interview with Laurence Olivier many, many years ago, and hearing him say, somebody had asked him, you know, what is your favorite kind of work? What do you love most? And he had said, well, hearing audiences gasp or scream or cry out or hear people sobbing in the audience, that's wonderful. But hearing them laugh means everything. And I thought, Laurence Olivier wants to make people laugh? That's very strange. Oh, how right he was. It is the very best possible thing. As a profession, we get quite a bad press. I mean, the lovey thing is just part of it. It's very hard for the media sometimes to take actors at all seriously, but we are self-obsessed, arrogant, cocky, introspective types, not real people at all. And that's not true. The smartest, funniest, gentlest, kindest, most thoughtful people as a group that I have ever known have been my fellow actors. I would love to find more great comedy to do because it's in the last few years it's given me so much pleasure. And there are a handful of Shakespearean roles I haven't played. They would never cast me as the comic. I played hysterical neurotics in Shakespeare most of my life. But I want to play Bottom the Weaver in Midsummer Night's Dream. I want to play Launce in Two Gentlemen of Verona. I really want to play Dogberry in Much Ado About Nothing. But I never get offered these roles. And so maybe down the road. And if I had not come here, I would still be this dour, serious, grim, humorless actor that I was for so many years.
Well, let's talk about those dour, humorless actor years. So before Star Trek comes into your life, you're working with the Royal Shakespeare Company and the National Theatre. You're in British TV classics like I, Claudius and Tinker Tailor Spy. Were you living your dream, or was there always something more in the back of your mind you were looking for?
The dream has never gone away, ever. It's with me today. And to find myself in a weekly rep or a 2-weekly rep, and then what had actually always been my ambition, to be accepted into the Royal Shakespeare Company, with whom I worked for about 12 years without going anywhere else. And there was nowhere else I wanted to be. I was working on great texts with brilliant actors, outstanding directors, and even more important, individuals of real intellect. And I've often said that it was my first day in a rehearsal room with the Royal Shakespeare Company that my formal education began, because I was surrounded by really clever people. And what that did to me was that it shut me up, because I'll never forget that first day's rehearsal in what is now the Donmar Theatre in London, but in those days it was a rehearsal room. And we were rehearsing Act 1, Scene 1 of Shakespeare's Henry IV, Part 1. John Barton was the director, someone who became a great influence on me, and a dear friend and colleague also. And so he talked about the scene, and I'd never been in a production before where the first day's rehearsal started with the director talking. What you did was you got up on your feet with a script in your hand and you began blocking it straight away because there was no time to do anything else. I think we actually had 12 weeks rehearsal before Part 1. And then he finished what he had to say about the scene, and he turned to the actor on his left, I think it was Michael Chaston, and said, Michael, come on, what are your feelings about this? And Michael talked for 5 or 6 minutes. He was playing the Duke of Exeter. And then he turned to Harriet Terry Hardiman, who was playing, I think, not Albany, but one of the other characters in the scene. And to my horror, I realized he was going round the circle, asking every actor what they thought. And I didn't have an idea in my head, because nobody had ever asked me that before. I had nothing to say, because I didn't have an idea in my head. And that night, I went home and I made a vow that I would never, never be in that situation again, where I didn't have a thought in my head or a comment that might be helpful to the production. So homework. And that's, of course, it's a different kind of discipline from the discipline I've been used to, which was learn lines, hit your marks, don't knock over the furniture, and do the best you can in the time that's given to you. But this was a different kind. This was intellectual discipline that I'd never encountered before. And for years, I listened to John Barton, Peter Hall, Trevor Nunn, Terry Hands, and many other wonderful directors talk about Shakespeare. And other actors discuss it. And the time came when I finally began to feel a little confident that I could make suggestions as well. But it took a long time, but that education was critical to what happened to me subsequently.
The rest is history, of course. You went on to create one of the most iconic characters in TV history in Jean-Luc Picard. But you've been able to do so many other things since. How were you able to avoid being boxed in by the character, like other people from Star Trek franchises have struggled?
It has not been without struggle. And it's something that I'm learning to let go of a little bit now, but it still controls some of my decision-making and choices that I make. Quite soon after the 7 seasons of the series wrapped, and maybe we'd made 1 or 2 movies. I was living here. I lived here for 17 years. I thought my life in the UK was over. Everything was happening here. And there was a particular project I was really keen to be part of, and a role in it that I wanted to play, a nice supporting role. And getting in to meet the director was proving really difficult. And finally, I made it. My agent, with whom I had developed a wonderful relationship, got me into his office, and we had a nice meeting. Everything went really well. And the director said to me, look, you're a terrific actor. I really like your work. But I've got to say to you, why would I want Jean-Luc Picard in my movie? That was hard to hear. Something that I had done had never been held against me before.
Yes.
And it made me highly sensitive to the fact that there was a potential downside to having had so much success in a successful series in a certain role, who had a very distinctive way of being. Very soon after that, we'd done the first movie, I remember now, and I remember saying to my agent, I don't care what my next job is, but it has got to have nothing to do with science fiction, nothing to do with space, nothing to do with having a rank, nothing to do with sitting in a chair. I want all of the... And God bless him, he came up with the role of Sterling in the movie Jeffrey, which was as a role, a gay man whose partner was dying of AIDS, and who they had both decided that comedy was the way to deal with this tragedy that was happening to them. And so the movie was quite successful, but the role was a transformation. And I think in all the time that has gone by since then, there is a little voice inside my head that says, how far removed is this role from Jean-Luc Picard? I mean, can I convince that director this time that he won't get Jean-Luc Picard, he'll get somebody else, like Charles Xavier.
Because you've continued to do, even recently, like really interesting indie films, things like Green Room and Match, and you keep returning to the stage as well. Is this part of a particular acting itch you need to scratch, or is it that little voice saying, I must get away from Picard with doing this variety of roles?
There is a little touch of that last element, but I love my job. I love it as much, if not more, today than I did 56 years ago when it began. the excitement I feel on the first day of walking onto a set or walking into a rehearsal room or even going into a sound studio to record an animated role, it hasn't gone away. And the challenges are even more exciting than they ever were. The only handicap is that one gets older and certain things become harder and harder to do. Night shoots. Night shoots. The other thing is, and it may have led from the remark that this director made, is that I have learned to love diversity. I love looking at something and knowing that this is not me, knowing that there are challenges. Sometimes there are specific challenges. I've just wrapped a movie in Montreal in Switzerland in which I play a concert pianist, a very famous, distinguished concert pianist who has suffered a tragedy in his life and abandoned the concert platform, didn't even sit in front of a piano for several years and lived in isolation. And the movie begins with him walking onto a concert platform for the first time after this absence to play. I don't play a note of music. I love music, but not a note. And so I've spent much of the last 4 months not learning to play the piano, but learning to look like someone who can play the piano. That's a good example. I didn't need to spend all those weeks and weeks and weeks before we began shooting the movie studying tape after tape after tape of great pianists, brilliant, wonderful, well-known pianists, talking, I know one or two, talking to them, and even watching people I'd never heard of, going to concerts, just to absorb the life and world of a classical musician. And it was challenging, but without that challenge, I think I just kind of curl up and disappear. It's invigorating. It makes me feel youthful, for one thing. And whenever something comes up, I'm right in the middle of reading a script right now, and on the first 5 pages, this man cuts a hole in the ice in Sweden and jumps into a lake through the hole in the ice and then comes back up again naked. And I read that and thought, no, I can't do that. I can't do that. Well, I've thought about it, and actually maybe it won't be that bad, you know.
It's certainly a gift to play the same character over a range of movies, and you've created another screen icon in Professor Charles Xavier. How did the X-Men franchise first come into your life?
I had finished a movie for Dick Donner, Conspiracy Theory, and I was at Warner's doing some ADR, and I got a note passed to me saying, would you look into Lauren Schuler Donner's office before you leave the studio? I'd met Lauren, she'd been on the set a few times. And I went to her office, and her secretary said, oh yeah, the door's open, go on in, she's expecting you. And so I pushed the door open, and Lauren was sitting behind her desk, and she picked something up off her desk and held it up in front of her and said nothing. And it was clearly a comic book. And I looked at it from across the room, and I said, why am I on the cover of that comic book? And Lauren said, exactly.
And then you were hooked.
I turned it down.
Ah, because?
Because of Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that first movie, the script and everything had franchise written all over it, you know, and a studio, Fox supporting it. And I thought, I am struggling already with one issue, with a character I became identified with. Do I really need a second character? Anyway, sensational cast that we had, the regulars on the X-Men series. I mean, sometimes I used to, when we were sitting around having a coffee between takes, I would just look around that circle of actors and be so excited to be sharing this movie with them. And of course it included, who was not at that time my best buddy, my bro, as he's become known, Ian McKellen, who I had been kind of intimidated by all my life because he was brilliant from the very beginning. I saw him as a young actor. Not only was he a brilliant actor, he was also gorgeous too, something I wasn't. And I wanted to act like him and look like him and have his education and all of those things. But we had adjoining trailers, very comfortable trailers. and you know, there's a lot of waiting around in movies like that. And so I would sit and drink tea in his trailer, or he would come to mine, and we found we had, in fact, a great deal in common. I've always been intrigued by the physical aspect of performance. It's one of the reasons why I was such a fan of Laurence Olivier's stage work, because he always brought an intense physicality. I'll never forget seeing him leap or fall from some high rostrum when he was playing Coriolanus at Stratford-on-Avon. It was terrifying and very, very impressive. But I think with me it all began with a serious attempt to hide myself as much as possible and to diminish Patrick Stewart. That has now been completely turned around. Interesting. I mean, I find it interesting. But finding a physicality that was not my own was very important to me. And when I was at drama school, I had a movement teacher, Rudy Shelley, a brilliant, brilliant man, also great with text and characterization, but he specialized in movement. And we would have whole classes in which we would explore physicality as a means of communicating character. And sometimes emotion, and sometimes even story. We would be asked to tell a story without language, just through physicality. So it's always been a big part of my life, and I enjoy it. I enjoy the feeling of being someone other than myself. But I suppose I should just add something to what I did say now, that is that probably largely thanks to a lot of very high quality, 5-star and very expensive Californian therapy, self-examination became a really important part of my life, where it really had not been at all. And so, and particularly as my film work has developed, and I watch other actors who I realized from the very beginning, those who I most admired. I mentioned Marlon Brando early on, and he was a great, great role model for me, even though I didn't understand what he was doing. But there was an unmistakable sense of an internal life in him. And actually, I think mostly of American actors when I think of this, and screen actors. I once went to a dinner party a few years ago, and I was late, and I was taking my coat off in the hallway, and I looked into the sitting room where the guests were beginning to assemble to go to dinner, and there was Carl Malden in the room. And I said to the hostess, I know you've got place cards and all that, but please, you've got to let me sit next to Carl Malden. Yes, you've got to. You must. Because he was an actor who I'd seen in countless movies, and of course the great Streets of San Francisco television series he did, who had the same thing. He brought an inner life. And I've worked on that more and more in recent years, and I find being on camera helps it a lot, as opposed to being in the theater, where there is a different style and a different approach. You cannot be on a stage in a 1,500-seat theater and think only about your interior life. It just wouldn't work. But on camera, I'm finding it now fascinating to, well, it's for me, it's mostly about being brave. And that's what I say to young actors. I do master classes from time to time, workshops and so on. And when they say to me, what is the most important thing? And I tell them, courage. You have to be able to risk. And if you don't risk, my principal in my drama school said to me just before I graduated, Patrick, you will never achieve success by insuring against failure. It took me decades to really understand what Duncan Ross said when he told me that. I was, for years. My work was about insuring against failure. So I rarely failed, but I didn't really succeed that often either. And I like to think that knowing that if you expose yourself as a performer, the sky will not fall on your head. On the contrary, actually. The sun will come out, maybe. And so there has been a huge shift in recent years in the way that I try to work.
You're a great actor, and as we've learned tonight, a great person too. On behalf of all of us at Bafta, thank you. Sir Patrick Stewart.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you.